Okay, welcome to an introduction to Constructivist Grounded Theory. And I put constructivist into parentheses because it is more like the history, the development of grounded theory, and the endpoint really is the constructivist grounded theory. So we're going to look today at, well, what on earth is it anyway? Where does it come from? Where is it going to? And where was it in the middle? What makes a grounded theory, and to actually some of the methods to undertake it. My big bugbear, and it's probably not just my bugbear, and that is so many studies are claiming that they're using grounded theory, but to be honest, they really are not. You'll find sometimes when people say, oh, I did inductive research and therefore it was grounded theory. No, that's not right. And I think part of the issue is here that it isn't really taught very much or very well. I don't know. But anyway, big bugbear. So hence this session. And this is the important thing and why I do the session. You have to locate yourself. And I really like how Morse, or I think it was Waring in Morse, explained this. It's a complicated and contented landscape. Yes, it really very much is. But because it is a landscape, you're able to pinpoint yourself and position yourself within the landscape. And this is what I was hoping to do. It is to distill it, to find the pathway through this rather complex landscape and to kind of find for us a clearer path. There is a bit of a caveat, of course, because whenever you try and simplify or clarify something, it will become a little bit essentialist, but it's necessary. I mean, you could basically read about grounded theory, all its different flavors for years to come, but you've got to get started somewhere and have an endpoint somewhere, unless you write a PhD about grounded theory. So I mentioned constructivist grounded theory. This is just to make it clear from the start, what you will hear will always have the flavor of constructivist. So that's by Charmaz grounded theory. And it does flavor everything that I do. I will talk about the origins of grounded theory and the kind of the different developments in between. But just so you know, that's what I am. I'm a constructivist. It does not mean that any other flavor of constructivism, of grounded theory is wrong. Not at all. It's just a different position. And it depends on how you position yourself in epistemology and ontology. Yes, I am throwing around big words. Well, I've already said, I asked, what do you think is grounded theory? And I suppose if I were to ask here, then I would get many different answers because there are so many. And in fact, it's easier to say, what is it not? So, I didn't really mean to have that cross there right from the start. So let's read around it. And that is, it's easier to say what it is not. It does not start with a hypothesis. It's not about disproving, well, I say it does not prove or disprove. I'm talking, if we're talking about post-positivist, it's disproof, of course, hypothesis. And while the literature review is not the first task, eventually throughout the development of grounded theory approaches, it has become quite understood that it's not possible to have no knowledge of the literature to start with. I mean, come on, we all come with baggage, we all come with knowledge, and there's a reason why we want to investigate something. So some of them were saying that knowledge of the literature is used as a sensitizing concept, i.e. you have an idea of what you're investigating and you have a kind of a direction, but you're not supposed to do a really thorough literature review because that will focus you too much and it might not enable you to construct a new understanding. The data analysis, and that's a really important thing, does not happen just at the end. And that's really rather difficult to most other ways of undertaking qualitative research. So you do need to start with the data analysis really early on. And I will explain later on why that is so important. So what is it? What's it for? So really what it actually means, it is to generate theories, big theories that explain how aspects of the social world works. Now, as you can imagine, that's a big ask, isn't it? And it is not actually necessary to aim all the way for theories. It does use inductive reasoning and emergent research, but I'm not the only one, and many of the authors question, well, can any research truly be inductive? I would argue no, because as I said before, we come with prior knowledge. But it is, but when you look at it with this whole thing of there's not a hypothesis to start with, then yes, it is inductive stroke emergent research, as long as one is aware and explains that, it's not starting from a blank slate. Grounded theories look for patterns, and anybody who's been to my, either seen the video on coding for qualitative data or been to the session, it will remind you of that, because that's pretty much the same thing. In analyzing qualitative data, you look for patterns, and in grounded theorists also look for patterns. And that might be you focus on a single case, and yet, because you're situated in the social world, you look for patterns in the data, in the categories, etc. Right, the history of grounded theory. We go all the way back to before even I was born, to 1967. Glaser and Strauss wrote really the seminal book, and that is The Discovery of Grounded Theory, an Approach to Qualitative Research. The reason why is because qualitative research was regarded as just pish. Basically, it was not acceptable in psychology, and in pretty much all other areas. It was quantitative. You needed to have numbers. That was the only way research was really considered to be rigorous. There were, like I think it's the Chicago school, there were some who were working on qualitative research, but it was incredibly timely that Glaser and Strauss really, Strauss, probably Strauss, because they were American, wrote this because it gave weight to this approach to qualitative research. And it is absolutely situated within its time. There is no question. So therefore, it was meant to be a credible, and that's the important word, a credible alternative. And at the time, and I think that was before Kuhn, wasn't it? It was really, we weren't quite not even at the post-positivist, but it was all about, there is a truth, there is a reality, and we research the reality. And that comes with all those assumptions. But they made it able to show that rigorous, systematic qualitative research is to be taken seriously. We, of course, have come on since then in our understanding of things like reality, so ontology, and knowledge, epistemology. The interesting thing is, isn't it, that the title actually says Discovery of Grounded Theory. And the image here of the sculptures by Michelangelo that weren't finished is very much how Glaser and Strauss understood it. They understood that you're collecting all this data, and you do all the analysis, and you take all of those steps, and then emerges a grounded theory. It's a bit like, they were chiseling away at the marble of the data, and then out comes the theory. And I think you already see here the difference to what a constructivist grounded theory might do. And that is they came from this positivist paradigm quite obviously. They understood it as there is an absolute truth, there is a reality, and then you chisel away and you discover that theory, rather than that the researcher constructs it. So it was distance. It was distance because they understood themselves as objective experts. So they felt distance. So here they are, they're collecting the data, they have the data. They are trained, they know how to deal with the data, and then they work with the data, and out emerges the theory. So there's no idea of actually co-constructing understanding and research with participants. So it's very much like the colonial ethnographer. And by the way, when I'm saying that, I also now realize the reason why you don't see any animations is because I'm using this new Zoom feature, and you can see me on the slides, but you can't see animations. So anyway, at least now I understand why you have the X through. Back to the colonial ethnographer. It's really, you know, when you think of the history of ethnography, that's colonialism. You know, that's really the kind of dominant culture and all of that. And it was this idea that you're a neutral observer. Now, since then, again, also ethnography has very much come on, and the understanding of there is no such thing as a neutral observer. So Glaser and Strauss came out of that, and Glaser is the one who actually stayed with his understanding. He kept with his original understanding, while Strauss was working with a co-author, with Corbin, and they went away from that and started to change their understanding of grounded theory and the background of it. So now the reinterpreting of grounded theory. So here we are. I created a map of, you know, kind of a bit of simplification, of course, of the different strands and developments of grounded theory. We have here the original assumptions and the start of it. So we have the epistemological assumptions, so the understanding of what knowledge is very positivist, is objectivist. And the ontological assumption is like it's realist, there is an objective reality, and that is independent of an individual's perception. And this is where sits the original discovery of grounded theory. So when you're then looking at Glaser, as I said, Glaser remained in this. So these are really, so you can say that if you're looking at the original Glaser and Strauss, and then all the writing and all the work that Glaser did later on, so Glaser stuck to the classic grounded theory. But here in the middle, we have Strauss and Corbin. So Glaser, he just maintained this, discovers the data, etc. But Strauss moved on, and initially there really was so the main difference was in the data analysis. Glaser remained close to the original version. Strauss reformulated it, and in the beginning made it even stricter. So looking at Strauss and Strauss and Corbin, which is called Straussian. So you have, you read this in the literature, you have Glaserian, you have Straussian, you have later on Charmazian. It's not easy to pronounce. So Strauss and Corbin, so in 1990, they had their first edition, and that was called Basics of Qualitative Research, which I also find is an interesting title because it talks about all of qualitative research rather than talking about just, you know, grounded theory. They kind of considered that grounded theory is the approach to qualitative research. So it was really very, very prescriptive. But I have seen relatively recent research projects, and in fact, some of the publications, or no, many of the publications actually, are in nursing and midwifery, and it's really interesting. There are some really good articles on which one to choose and that explain the differences, and then there are quite a few research projects that actually use either Glaserian or Strauss and Corbin because it seems to fit that discipline. And this is what I said. I'm not saying any of those are wrong. I mean, if you ask me somewhere in a cafe, or what do you think about the original one? Of course, I would say, oh, there's no such thing as truth and reality. And of course, Glaser and Strauss were quite wrong with their positivist understanding. But that's just me. That's one person saying that. So let's keep an open mind. So the third edition in 2008 was even more flexible. And finally, they did say, well, use the procedures in your own way. I wonder if the fact that Charmaz started, it was about 2000, 2001, that Charmaz started to publish on constructivist grounded theory. And I wonder if that was kind of a reaction to that. And again, you find quite a few articles that discuss and between the authors and compare, etc. So the difference for them, or the difference between their development and the original Glaserian one, is that they describe the sampling on theoretical grounds. And so that's a theoretical sampling, and you will also find that in constructivist grounded theory. And I will, of course, explain that. They did say, finally, that a hypothesis can be developed and verified. And in that way, it became more flexible, and saying that while it's not about disproving, it can be about developing. Now, they said verified, one has to wonder if it's ever possible to do that, and or if it should be possible to do that. They said that induction, deduction, and abduction can be used, while the original one was only talking about induction and rejected deduction. Now, I wonder if everybody knows what is understood in abduction. So I had to read on what on earth it actually is. So basically, what they're calling abduction is when you're in the data and you're starting to think and you're making a bit of a leap. So you make that leap and thinking, I think this leads to that one. And then you investigate that further, maybe within your data or in further data collection. And they call that little leap abduction. So they also accepted that we do need to pay attention to the context, the influences, everything else that's going on. You can't just focus on the data and think that by focusing on the data, you're a neutral observer and researcher, but they understand you have to go and situate. Constructivist grounded theory, and I hope everybody knows the Lego movie, is exactly what it says. It constructs it. So Charmaz, or indeed Bryant and Charmaz, a lot of the publications are by both, but it really is Charmaz who developed this and who's credited with constructivist theory. As I said, so early on, she started in 2000, and then many, many more publications, and you'll find some really excellent ones by her. So now, finally, we're in the kind of in the 21st century understanding of not all, but of many researchers, and that is that what we're doing here is social construction, because not only do we as a researcher decide on what we want to research, so that comes from our own context, but also we're looking at, where do we get the data from? Then in the analysis, we construct our understanding of the data. It's not the Michelangelo that chisels it away, because if I work with data and somebody else works with the data, well, we probably would have, when I say different, I don't mean completely different understanding, because we are talking about the social world here, but slight differences. And the other question is, if somebody investigates the social world, let's say you've got data, somebody from Western culture or from European culture has that data, but then a researcher from a different culture were to analyze that data, what would the outcome be? Would it be different? Well, I would think so. So yes, it's always, you have to locate it, and it always is specific time, space, culture, situation. There is no such thing as a broad brush stroke that says, and this is how human beings act and understand, etc. By the way, in constructivist grounded theory, and I had to put this in there because it's quite important, when you do the coding, it's always done in the ing form. So it's always done in the active form. So let's say observing, understanding rather than understand. And this is because they're trying to push towards the action and the process of the social world. I did that because, you know, I undertook a constructivist grounded theory approach, but I don't know if it makes such a big change. Maybe it does, but then I haven't done one without the Gerund. Sorry, I'm German. So Charmaz's constructivist grounded theory has three really important key areas, and that is, again, it's the relativity of the researcher's perspective, position, research situation. That's all what's mentioned earlier. It's the positioning of yourself. But also the researcher's reflexivity, in which means the researcher has to be aware of not just their context and their position, but their effect, because they, of course, they have a massive effect on the process, on the outcome of the research. And the depictions of social constructions in the studied world, because everything is a construct and everything is a process. So I'm not wearing my lovely, that's, you know, I do have that the pin badge, and I'm not wearing it at the moment because you wouldn't be able to read it anyway, but there we go. It's very similar to this big thing of themes do not emerge. It goes back to this whole thing that we are constructing codes, we are constructing understanding. And that goes hand in hand with the understanding that it is, we must be researching things in the specific circumstances, and we have to be explicit about this. We have to be explicit about how we position ourselves and why and how we are analyzing the data. And we have tools to do that. So my own flavor, as I mentioned before, of grounded theory is constructivist. So what I'm talking about now will be because of having undertaken constructivist grounded theory methods. Now, if you were able to see the animation, then the actual most don't would have come up after the first sentence, and that is not all, that even Strauss and Corbin said that, you know, not all grounded theory studies build theory. And in fact, very, very few do. And that's rather understandable because we're talking here about a massive undertaking. A theory is a bit more than something that happens maybe in a research project. We're talking about something very fundamental here about the social world, about human behavior and things like that. So the lovely thing is that you don't have to aim all the way for a theory. You can use grounded theory methods in your research, and you can actually also mix it up with others as long as you're explicit and you describe and justify why you do that. The nice thing here is by using grounded theory methods, you can refer to a really well-established, well-developed area of qualitative research. And you can always, with every step that you take, every tool, every approach, you have the information, you have the references that explain why you're doing it and how to do it. So you can use it in many different ways, and by being able to undertake, let's say, for example, the analysis in this very structured way, by undertaking it in a grounded theory and a constructivist grounded theory way, you feel, at least I have to say that I felt a lot more safe, a lot more, because this is for my PhD, so this is all already done, and it felt good to be able to say, I'm doing this because, and then refer to the literature and position myself in it, rather than having a bit of a worry maybe to flap about a bit and then, why am I doing this line by line coding? But it's really situated well within the research world. So we have 4 really important steps that are done in grounded theory, in constructed grounded theory. So with your data, you code it, you categorize it. Now, I have a video, I forgot to add that, but I'll pop it into the reference as well when you're being sent out this PowerPoint, and I have a video on coding qualitative data, and also it has some reference to the excellent Saldana and other literature on coding. And those excellent references also help you and talk about approaches to coding done in constructivist grounded theory. You do theoretical sampling. And you remember when I talked about Strauss and Corbin, so Charmaz also took this and ran with it. And theoretical sampling is different to what we otherwise might understand in sampling. Theoretical sampling is not about trying to find a representative number or type of data, not collections, data people. I mean, I can't find the word at the moment. Rather, because you start coding early, let's say you go and undertake some interviews, some initial ones, because you want to know about I don't know, the impact of certain assessments on undergraduate student population. So you start out with some of those undergraduate students who have undertaken that assessment. And then after the first interviews, you already start with a coding categorization. And you start to feel that something interesting is coming out there. So it seems that the answers are moving towards I don't know, I don't want to say fear, but maybe something about maybe deeper understanding. That would be on the positive side there. So then you're looking to investigate that area further. So you'd either be changing who you're talking to get your data, and or you're changing the questions that you're asking because you want to drill deeper. And you keep doing that. And while you're doing that, and while you're coding, you also compare all the time. You compare the code and the categories that come out what came out of the first set with the second set. You compare them in between, and so on and so forth. And while you're doing that, you also write memos. And you write the memos when, for example, when you've done the first coding of the first ones, and you start to think, there's something about really deep learning going on. But if you just think that, and you don't write a memo that actually says, when I was doing this, and I was coding that, and I kind of focused on this, I understood that these respondents, that was the word, seemed to be talking about deeper learning. So you write this down and you date it, and that can also become data. But it also means that you can feel much more secure about your systematic approach. So coding and categorization, there are 2 steps, and they're quite prescribed in that sense because there are 2 steps, but again, it really helps you. Now, there's a first phase that's called the initial coding, and the second phase, that's the focused coding. In the initial coding, you probably generate many codes, potentially even hundreds, depending on how much data you have. And what you do is you go really small. Now, I've known of some researcher who went by each word. I have absolutely no idea how they did that. I couldn't do it. So I did the line by line coding rather than the segments, because for me, the reason was because I started out with autoethnographic data. So there was data that I had generated, and I wanted to deconstruct the data. So that's when you do the line by line coding, and that's really quite arbitrary. So let's say you have a Word document and you have one, create a table, you have one column, and however that data gets, or each sentence gets moved into the next line, that's your line. And it doesn't matter if that sentence is finished or not, that is your line. And that feels weird, but it's very, very interesting, because by deconstructing the data that way, you are considering a lot of them differently than you otherwise would have, because it tends to be that when you code qualitative data and you go by sentence or by segment or by paragraph, you start interpreting really early on rather than trying to stick to the descriptive coding of that bit of data. Of course, as you can imagine, there's a lot of in the literature about is it good to deconstruct, isn't it? However, that's what it says for here. And again, it is up to you. You can go with segments of data, but I would always say, give it a go, have a look at what it feels like to start and do the line-by-line coding. And I found it a bit difficult in the beginning, but eventually it actually went really quite fast. So the second phase, because you end up with all of those codes, is to refine them. So you focus on the most significant frequent initial codes. So you start to sort them, you start to synthesize them, and you keep comparing them and then create those focused codes. So you've got those two phases of the two steps of the coding, and that's your first thing that you do. Well, of course, then you're already going and collect more data. So you need to keep open. When you do the initial coding, you need to be open to anything. And that's why it actually helps to do the line-by-line coding, because you stop yourself much more from the interpreting. So you stick close to it. Yeah, you do use kind of descriptive. You do use descriptive codes. You can use in vivo ones, but in vivo. Sorry, you can use them as long as they're descriptive. That's helpful as well. And you apply them to your data. And at this stage, it really is not about using pre-existing categories. So that's an important thing when you do when you do use grounded theory methods. You cannot use pre-existing categories. That's a different type of analyzing qualitative data. And you use the ing form, so you see these as actions. What does it mean in a practical way? They are all provisional, of course, because it's your initial step. You end up with loads of them, and you not just may reword them, because you probably will reword them, because you will be focusing on them, you will be synthesizing them. And you have to now capture the ones that really grab you, that really stand out for you, and that are potentially illuminated by other codes that are happening. It's a good idea to actually do it quite quickly, because again, it stops you from going too far into the interpretation. And also I found by doing it quite quickly and going through and doing them, and in fact, I was often doing it in the train on my journeys in. I don't know why, but it kind of helped to do that, have these kind of concentrated half an hour. And it kind of gets you over the first hurdle of it being a bit weird when you do the line-by-line coding. Because what you really want to do, you want to elevate them, you want to analytic codes eventually. The focus coding, yes, you're getting now into categories, because that's what you want to do. You want to keep elevating, and you want to also diminish the number. So you want to reduce the number of codes. What can you do with hundreds of codes? That's not an analysis. That's probably just a bunch of hundreds of descriptive codes. So keep comparing it, and you are looking for patterns. So when it says most frequent or significant codes, the or is very different, because just because something is most frequent, of course, doesn't know that it is most significant, and vice versa. It might be that there are some significant areas, but you have fewer similar codes than a different one. But it needs to make sense to you. You keep writing your memos, you keep writing why you do this, what you do, and how you're elevating these to more analytical codes that go above and beyond the descriptive level. So, I mean, quite obviously, you're constructing the codes, you're constructing the categories. So then you go for the theoretical sampling. So, as I mentioned before, it's not about population representativeness. It is strategic. You aim for specific ones. So I can give you an example from my own research. So I had done my ethnographic data, and through the initial coding, this focused coding, and started to categorize, I had certain areas of that started to stand out for me that I had constructed, and that had to do with, because my research is on creating historical clothing. There's a lot more than that, but let's just stick to that. So that started to be things that had very much, that were anchored in childhood experiences of self embodiment. So I then went and got further data from others, from people who are historical costumiers, often professionals in doing that, to then investigate their understanding. And because of this theoretical sampling, because I deliberately went for these people, I also went deliberately for an approach to narrative interviewing, because of this whole idea of people might want to talk about childhood, etc. But I didn't want to push them into the direction, because this is, after all, only theoretical sampling. I might have been wrong because I had autoethnographic data. It might have just been me. So I got them to talk, to give me their story of their experiences. And guess what? I was right. Well, thank goodness, otherwise the research would have fallen down a bit. But there was a lot about understanding of self-embodiment, childhood, developments, and all of that. So yeah, you have to, of course, done the first 2 cycles of coding, because unless you have categories already and start to have an understanding, then you can't do theoretical sampling. It checks and refines, and it also gives you even more opportunities to constantly compare the data. Here's a question, here's an example of what I was talking about, all the different things. So let's say the question was, can you tell me about a memorable learning experience in your life? So what you might call a sensitizing concept might be literature that I'm already somehow aware of, and I am, of emotion and learning. So I did the interview coding and realized that in this interview, there were kind of repeated mentions of dismissal. And so did the coding, and did the second step, the categorization. And these areas of dismissal came out as there were categories of self-respect, respecting others, being respected, and taking them together and elevate them up would be a core category of respect. If I were then to go for theoretical sampling, I would want to interview more people, and I would want to know more about maybe negative or positive learning examples where they felt or didn't feel respected, because I would want to drill down further into that. And obviously, this is an example of where we did get from colleagues, we collected kind of data so we could use them in teaching situations. Now, obviously, I would not do that with just one single short interview. I need a bit more data than that. What's the constant comparison? Well, it is very much what it says. So you write your memos and you compare. So you look at the data and the codes. You look at data and data. So you have different interviews maybe, and you look at the different, so explicitly look at different data from this interviewee and the other interviewee. Then you look at the codes. Well, if I compare them maybe between interviewees or between different stages of the coding. And you do the same with the categories and categories and categories. So all the time you're looking at your data and you compare it with each other. And the reason why you do that is so that you're trying to really get deep into all of it. You're trying to not miss out on any, and you're trying to really understand that data. It helps you with the categorization. So we have an example again. So we had the category of self-respect, respecting others, being respected. So comparing that, perhaps there's a relationship between these categories of value, maybe self-value, done the theoretical sampling, said you wanted to hear more from others. And then with each interview, you compare them. So you've got your categories already, maybe from the first ones. And in the next ones, you look, well, do I find them in here? Are these categories kind of similar? Are they on a similar level, or are they a more discrete category? Do they belong into another category? And so on. And all the while, you're writing your memos and you explain why you're doing what you're doing. And also, you remind yourself, trust me, if you do a part-time PhD like mine, I'm now in year 7. I've got another one, finish it all off. I cannot remember what on earth I was doing in my analysis 5 years ago. So thank goodness for memo writing. You engage. Memo writing means you engage with your materials, develop your ideas, and important one here, critical reflexivity. You keep talking about how you influence that, how you go about constructing what you are constructing here. Write them quickly. Consider them to be very much like spontaneous journaling, for example. You just write down, you just write it. It doesn't matter if it sounds weird, it doesn't matter if you've got mistakes. It's about you, it's your natural voice. You just blather onto the page. Yeah, here I've got an example. So there I was, said, all the way back to 2018. If I hadn't written that down, I wouldn't remember it. And I was coding, and I was kind of being surprised by some of the codes that came out of that. So I was writing about it. And while I was writing about it, I actually got more and more into the understanding of upbringing, of history, of the historical place of that character I was talking about, and so on. So it not only describes, it also helps you when you start writing, thinking once again deeper and potentially wider. Now, this is something which is a tricky one. And that's not actually something that I'm engaging with, because, as I said, I was using grounded theory, constructivist grounded theory methods. If you are going all the way into constructing a theory, there has to come a moment of theoretical saturation. And what it means is that you keep adding cases, adding data until you find nothing new in the data. You feel like you have no more new insights, and you feel that this is saturated. I've been for many years now trying to find a definitive answer to, when do you know that it's saturated? Well, there is no answer. The answer is you feel like there's nothing new coming in. I think it is a tricky one, because I think we all tend to never thinking that we are finished, that we can't find anything new. But you have to come to a point of saying, nope, I've got enough now, there's nothing new coming. I suppose you could do that if you were doing this research that I mentioned earlier on, on this new assessment, and you have collected data from, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50, and there's like the last 10 or the last 2 or 3, I don't know, I'm just saying there's nothing new coming out, that all of the data talks about the same things. So you would then say, yes, I think it really is about deep learning, there's nothing new coming in, and I feel like this is, saturated. There's no need any longer for me to look for any more data. So to recap what I've been talking about, this is from, this is a visual representation of a grounded theory. This is from Charmaz, and it shows you all of those stages. You have a research question and not a hypothesis. Well, you can, but then it's only about developing the hypothesis, but you have a question. Or the research question can also be an investigation into an area. So that was mine, for example. My question was, what does it mean? What is happening there? It can be really vague, and that's the beauty of undertaking constructivist grounded theory. It can be vague. It's fine. You don't have to go in, because you're not supposed to be undertaking an in-depth literature review at the start. And I mean, it says here about recruitment and sampling of participants, or indeed, I did something different. I used autoethnographic data. You collect the data, you do the initial coding, you do the focus coding, But while you're doing that, you keep doing the theoretical sampling. You pull in more data and more data, but you keep doing, so it is a circle. You keep doing it around here, you keep doing it and doing it. And this is why this arrow here shows the kind of the circle bit. Once you feel things are saturated, so you feel the categories has reached a saturation, you go about theory building. All the while, of course, you write the memos. And you constantly compare. And then at the end, you write it all up. I have not aimed at theory building, and I don't know. I mean, this is absolutely up to people. It depends on the area you're investigating. It depends on your research. I did not feel that what I was doing lent itself to theory building. It wasn't so much within the realm of social science. It was more art and humanities and things like that. So why would you want to do it? These are all things that I mentioned before, but it can be used in many different ways for exploring processes, social processes, personal processes, just humans, I would say, the social world. You don't have to aim for a fancy theory building, but it gives you the tools because it is well established as a research methodology. You have to be very clear about which flavor of grounded theory you use. You have to position yourself. You have to explain why you're using what you're using. So you have to explain how you understand knowledge, how you understand the world, reality, and you have to position yourself. And it does allow a kind of inductive and emergent research without this whole fear or the potential of becoming a bit wishy-washy. So as long as you undertake all of these things quite clearly and explain them, then you are quite stable, you're quite safe in your approach. So here is what I mentioned before. I will send out the PowerPoint and the readings of some really nice ones. And look at here, the Riga one, for example, I mentioned. It's one of the ones that were in nursing inquiry. So it's an interesting area of Straussian, Glaserian grounded theory. Right, thank you very much. So let's now stop the recording, please.